America is deeply divided. On April 5, 2025, this division spilled onto the streets. Over 1,400 protests erupted across all 50 states. This was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a planned day of action. The message was clear: hands off. These protests, organized by a broad coalition, targeted the policies of President Donald Trump. They also targeted Elon Musk, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency. The protests represented a boiling point. Americans were fed up. They felt their rights and freedoms were under attack. The scale of the protests was staggering. Nearly 600,000 people participated. From major cities to small towns, Americans raised their voices. They demanded change. The hands-off protests became a lightning rod. They focused attention on the deep anxieties and anger simmering beneath the surface of American society. The hands-off protests were united by a common thread. They were a rejection of what many saw as a billionaire takeover of the government. Protesters argued that the Trump administration, influenced by figures like Elon Musk, was prioritizing the wealthy over the needs of ordinary Americans. One of the loudest chants at the protests was, "Billionaires out, people in." This encapsulated the core demand of the movement to reclaim the government for the people. Protesters called for an end to policies that they believed benefited the rich at the expense of the poor and middle class. The protests also highlighted the growing economic inequality in the United States. Many Americans felt left behind in an economy that seemed rigged against them. The hands-off movement gave voice to their frustrations. It channeled their anger into a collective demand for economic justice. The hands-off. Protests were fueled by a deep fear. Americans were afraid of losing their social safety net. The Trump administration had implemented deep cuts to federal programs. These cuts impacted millions. Social Security was a major point of contention. The administration's reorganization of the Social Security Administration caused widespread anxiety. The closure of field offices made it harder for people to access vital services. The protests reflected a broader fear that the government was abandoning its responsibility to protect its most vulnerable citizens. The downsizing of the federal workforce also sparked outrage. Over 121,000 federal workers had been fired. Unions argued that this was an assault on public services. They pointed to the vital role that these workers play in everything from food safety to environmental protection. The hands-off movement stood in solidarity with these workers. They demanded an end to the assault on public services. Fear was a powerful motivator for many who joined the hands-off protests. It wasn't just the fear of economic hardship. It was also the fear of a government that seemed increasingly hostile to immigrants, people of color, and LGBTQ+ individuals. The Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies sparked widespread condemnation. The mistaken deportation of a Salvadoran man became a symbol of a system that seemed broken and cruel. Protesters carried signs that read, "No ban, no wall, no raids." They demanded an end to the climate of fear that had gripped immigrant communities. The rollback of protections for transgender people also drew fierce opposition. Many saw this as part of a broader attack on LGBTQ+ rights. The hands-off protests became a space for people to express their solidarity with all marginalized communities. They sent a clear message. Hate and discrimination would not be tolerated. The voices of resistance, from Capitol Hill to Union Halls, the hands-off. Protests were notable for the diversity of voices represented. Elected officials, union leaders, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens all came together to demand change. Their voices, amplified by the sheer scale of the protests, sent a powerful message to the Trump administration. Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, delivered a blistering critique of the administration's policies. He compared Trump's administration to those of Mussolini and Hoover. His words resonated with the anger and frustration felt by many Americans. Union leaders like Randy Irwin of the National Federation of Federal Employees and Everett Kelly of the American Federation of Government Employees condemned the attacks on public services and collective bargaining rights. They argued that these attacks were not just about shrinking the government, but about silencing dissent and weakening the power of working people. Echoes of history, parallels to past struggles for justice. The hands-off. Protests were not an isolated event. They were part of a long and storied tradition of protest and dissent in the United States. The images of hundreds of thousands of people marching for their rights evoked memories of past struggles for social justice. The civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, and the fight for LGBTQ+ equality all provided inspiration for the hands-off movement. The protesters drew strength from the knowledge that they were part of a long lineage of Americans who had fought for a more just and equitable society. The protests also highlighted the fragility of democracy. They served as a stark reminder that the rights and freedoms enjoyed by Americans are not guaranteed. They must be constantly defended and protected. The hands-off movement represented a reawakening of civic engagement. It was a reminder that the power to create change ultimately rests in the hands of the people. The battle for the soul of America, democracy, and public service at a crossroads. The hands-off. Protests went beyond specific policy disagreements. They represented a fundamental clash of values. At stake was the very soul of America. The protesters were fighting for a vision of America that was inclusive, compassionate, and committed to the common good. They were challenging a vision of America that seemed increasingly dominated by corporate interests, where the pursuit of profit trumped the public good, and where the voices of the most vulnerable were silenced. The protests highlighted the growing tension between democracy and unfettered capitalism. The protests also underscored the importance of public services. The attacks on the federal workforce and social safety net programs were seen as part of a broader effort to dismantle the public sphere. This dismantling would leave individuals increasingly reliant on private corporations and the whims of the market. The hands-off movement served as a powerful reminder that a just and equitable society requires a strong and vibrant public sector. Beyond the streets, the long road ahead for the hands-off movement, the hands-off. Protests were a powerful demonstration of people power. However, the fight was far from over. The protests were just the beginning of what promised to be a long and arduous struggle. The movement faced an uphill battle against a powerful and entrenched opposition. The Trump administration showed no signs of backing down from its agenda. The protesters knew that they would need to maintain their momentum if they were to achieve lasting change. This would require sustained organizing, grassroots mobilization, and unwavering commitment to their cause. The movement also recognized the need to engage in electoral politics. They were determined to channel their energy into electing leaders who shared their values. They understood that lasting change could only come from transforming the political landscape. A global cry for change, international solidarity with the American people. The hands-off. Protests did not happen in a vacuum. They were part of a global wave of protest against inequality, injustice, and the erosion of democratic norms. From the streets of London to the squares of Hong Kong, people around the world were rising up to demand a better future. The American protesters drew inspiration from these global movements. They found strength in knowing that they were not alone in their struggle. The hands-off. Protests served as a powerful reminder that the fight for social justice transcends national borders. The protests also highlighted the interconnectedness of global issues. Climate change, economic inequality, and the rise of authoritarianism are not confined to any one country. They require global solutions and international cooperation. The hands-off movement, by connecting with and amplifying the voices of other global movements, contributed to the growing chorus demanding a more just and sustainable world.